indirect ways we subsidize carbon emissions, and we could get, and that's something we could work on reversing too.
Sure, I want to make sure we're respectful of people's time. So.
Yeah, but we got them at 5 minutes.
Yeah. Guy, you wrote a book on local and community-based programs to address climate change.
Well, actually, local, community, and national.
And national, but I wonder if you could talk on Ms. Jones' question about the hope of and possibility for program and actions at the local level. You mentioned utility-based on-bill financing programs. Are there others that you
yes.
cite from your work and research to share?
Yeah, and because I do believe you have to start at the local level. You don't build to the national level without starting locally. And so, yeah, I mean, one of my things is I also suggested that we could do is, again, we could, one of the things that is that the state of Washington has the power to do under its constitution is what's called conduit financing. It can issue bonds to borrow money. It can lend those to nonprofit, and that can be backed by the nonprofits, not by the state. So the state isn't spending any money, tax money, and it's also not assuming any liability. The liability are on the bondholders and the nonprofits. And so we could, and so for example, one way we could do is, and here's where I do want to pick winners, is we could encourage wind plants. We could encourage a whole lot of wind farms in Washington State, because wind farms have to borrow money at a higher cost than coal generators do. Because the reason is, even when you have these big companies like Excel doing developments, they end up contracting with these smaller companies, and the loans are made by the smaller companies. And smaller companies have to borrow money at a higher rate. So most wind farms end up, whether the originator of it is a big company or a small company, the one who actually builds it is a small company that borrows money at a high cost. Because again, comparatively small companies have to. So this is a thing where we could take our conduit financing and with no liability to the taxpayer, lend money to wind farms and give them lower cost of capital. Now, the one thing is that it's required to be nonprofit. You cannot lend that money to under the Washington State Constitution. Conduit financing cannot be done to a for-profit company. But that's not all bad, because what you could do is you could invest in community-owned wind turbines and wind farms. And in many cases, those wind farms will produce not just for the local community, but for the local community and for export to all of Washington State. And one thing, you tend to get a lot of opposition to wind farms based on people not liking to look at them. And it's been found that when people have a stake in them, when they get some ownership, a lot of that opposition melts away. So this would also be a way of overcoming the whole NIMBY, not in my backyard problem you have with wind farms, because all of a sudden, if it's their wind farm, you're going to find people are not going to oppose it as much. And so that's a heck of a, and of course, it also provides some long-term little bit of economic stability to the local communities. So that's a great community-based thing we could do, is encouraging wind farms. I would also add that we could do an even tougher renewable portfolio standard than we have in Washington State, although we have a fairly tough one now. I don't think there's any reason we couldn't have a tougher one. That's another thing. I will also add something else we could do is, although transportation is national, the state and local communities do have a lot of legal say in these coal trains and oil pipelines. And I would say a very important thing right now is to oppose those oil pipelines and those coal trains in any way we can. That's something else local communities can do. And we should fight hard, and this is something we should fight hard for our state to do. And right now we have oil trains passing through Olympia. And I would love to see if we could find a way of stopping, if not at the Olympia level, at the state level. And the same thing with the coal trains that may or may not pass through Olympia, but will pass through somewhere, because they do have effects on the local communities, and there is some legal authority. And I'll tell you one other thing. One of the groups that has the greatest legal authority are the tribes, the Native American tribes. And so so in terms of stopping coal trains and oil trains, it's important to give support to the Native American communities who, because of treaty rights, have a heck of have some power that we may not otherwise have to stop some of these things.
And so I just wanted to thank you guys for coming, and also maybe you go talk to you individually for a few minutes. But I want to thank you guys for both speaking, especially Yoram for coming.
Thank you.
We speak at night again at 7 o'clock at Traditions Cafe. If you want to tell anybody else.
Yeah, he's but I don't have to get him till like 6:15.
Good comment.
Well, I didn't even say half of what I wanted to.
Well, no, of course.
Because it is all about, it doesn't matter how well because once you vote on it, they will vote for it. And you don't vote on that.
Yeah, no,
I